My name is Emily Rhodes, and this is a real-life story of what happened to me. For a long time, I kept this story to myself because I was embarrassed. I felt small. I felt invisible. But now I understand something important: silence protects disrespect. And I refuse to protect it anymore. For 12 years, I believed I had a strong marriage. I believed I had a partnership built on love, respect, and teamwork. I truly believed my husband and I were building a life together. Every morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. before anyone else in the house. I would stand quietly in the kitchen while the world was still dark, making breakfast, packing lunches, preparing coffee exactly the way he liked it. I ironed clothes, signed school papers, checked homework, and made sure everything was ready before the day began. By the time my husband came downstairs in his suit, checking his phone and talking about meetings, the house was already running smoothly. He would say, "Big day today," and I would smile and tell him he would do great. And I meant it. I believed his success was our success. When he received promotions, I celebrated. When he closed business deals, I felt proud. When he worked late nights, I stayed up to wait for him. I handled everything else so he could focus on his career without distraction. I managed the bills, scheduled doctor appointments, organized birthdays, cleaned the house, grocery shopped, cooked meals, helped with school projects, comforted sick children, and solved problems before they even reached him. If something broke, I called the repair service. If a child struggled in school, I sat down for hours to help. If family members visited, I prepared the house and hosted everyone with a smile. I did not have weekends off. I did not have paid leave. I did not have performance reviews. But I worked every single day. The strange part is that I never questioned my role because I believed love meant sacrifice. I believed this was what good wives did. At social gatherings, when people asked what I did for a living, I would open my mouth to answer, but most times my husband spoke first. He would say it lightly, sometimes even laughing, "She's just at home. Just at home." At first, I told myself he did not mean anything by it. I convinced myself I was being too sensitive. But slowly, that word just began to hurt. It felt like my entire existence had been reduced to something small and unimportant. The night everything changed seemed ordinary at first. The children were asleep. The house was quiet. I had noticed a large amount of money transferred from our joint account earlier that week. It was not a small amount. It was thousands of dollars. I did not accuse him of anything. I simply asked him calmly about it. His reaction surprised me. His face became tense. His voice turned sharp. He asked why I was questioning him. I told him I had a right to know because it was our account. That is when he looked at me in a way I had never seen before. There was no warmth in his eyes. There was no partnership in his tone. He said, "Why are you acting like you have authority over this? I'm the one who earns the money." My heart started beating fast, but I stayed calm. I told him we both contributed to this family. And then he laughed, a short, cold laugh that I will never forget. He said, "You don't even work, Emily. You're just a housewife." The room felt smaller. The air felt heavy. Just a housewife. That sentence echoed in my mind over and over again. I did not cry in front of him. I did not shout. I simply felt something shift deep inside me. For 12 years, I believed I was a partner. In one sentence, he showed me that he believed I was nothing more than an expense. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while he slept peacefully beside me. I asked myself one simple question: if I do not work, then what have I been doing every single day for the last 12 years? I started replaying my daily routine in my mind. The cooking, the cleaning, the organizing, the planning, the emotional support, the driving, the tutoring, the budgeting. If I disappeared tomorrow, how much would it cost to replace everything I do? That question would soon change my life. What happened after that night led us somewhere neither of us expected. It led us into a courtroom. And when the truth came out, even he could not believe the numbers. Before I continue this story, I want you to know again that this is real. This happened to me. And if you believe that respect matters in marriage, if you believe that invisible work should never be called just, then I want you to subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the subscribe button so you do not miss what happens next, because the courtroom moment changed everything. And in the comments, tell me the country and the state where you are watching from. I read every single comment, and it means so much to see how far this story travels across the world. The morning after my husband called me just a housewife, I woke up before my alarm rang. The house was still quiet, and for the first time in years, I did not jump out of bed to rush into the kitchen. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying his words in my mind. You're just a housewife. The sentence did not make me angry anymore. It made me focused. Something inside me had shifted during the night. I was no longer trying to prove him wrong with emotions. I wanted facts. If I did not work, then I needed to understand exactly what I was doing every day. I quietly got out of bed, made coffee, and instead of starting breakfast, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. That table had been my office for 12 years, but I had never called it that. That morning, I did. I took out a notebook and wrote one simple title at the top of the page, My Daily Tasks. Then I began listing everything I did in one normal week. I wrote down cooking 3 meals a day, preparing school lunches, cleaning the house, laundry, ironing clothes, grocery shopping, scheduling doctor appointments, attending parent-teacher meetings, helping with homework, driving the children to activities, managing the household budget, paying bills, planning birthdays, organizing holidays, calling repair services, hosting family gatherings, and supporting my husband emotionally after stressful workdays. The list kept growing. I filled one page, then another. I realized that I had been running an entire operation alone. This was not a hobby. This was management. When the children woke up, I prepared breakfast like I always did, but something was different. I was observing my own work as if I were studying someone else's job. After everyone left the house, I returned to my laptop. This time, I searched for the average salary of a full-time nanny in our area. The number appeared on the screen, and I felt my eyes widen. Then I searched for the cost of a private tutor. Then a housekeeper. Then a personal chef. Then a household manager. I wrote every number down carefully next to the task it matched. My hands were steady, but my heart was beating fast. By lunchtime, I had done calculations that shocked even me. If my husband had hired professionals to replace everything I did in a month, it would cost thousands and thousands of dollars. And that was just for basic services. That did not include the emotional support, the midnight comfort, the mental planning, and the invisible problem-solving that no one ever sees. For the first time in years, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. I felt clarity. This was not about ego. It was not about revenge. It was about truth. I had allowed myself to believe that because no money entered my personal bank account, my work had no financial value. But the market said otherwise. The world said otherwise. The numbers did not lie. That afternoon, I printed everything and placed it neatly in a folder. I did not confront him that night. I did not argue again. I simply observed him. I watched him come home tired, loosen his tie, and talk about profits and contracts. He believed money was the only proof of contribution. He believed income meant importance. I stayed silent because I was building something stronger than an argument. I was building evidence. Weeks passed, and the distance between us grew. The respect I once felt began to fade. Conversations became shorter. He started coming home later. Then one evening, he told me he needed space. A month later, he filed for divorce. I remember holding the papers in my hands and feeling strangely calm. If this had happened a year earlier, I would have panicked. But now I had information. I had proof. When I met my lawyer for the first time, I brought the folder with me. She looked through the pages slowly, nodding as she read. When she finished, she looked at me and said, "Do you realize how powerful this is?" I told her I was not trying to be powerful. I was trying to be accurate. She smiled and said sometimes accuracy is power. That day, we began organizing everything properly. She explained how courts evaluate contributions in marriage, especially in long-term relationships where one partner stays home to manage the household. She told me that unpaid labor is often recognized in financial settlements. As she spoke, I felt validated in a way I had never felt before. For years, I had introduced myself quietly as just a housewife. Now I was hearing legal terms like contribution, asset division, and spousal support. The words felt different. They felt serious. They felt real. I walked out of that office understanding something important. I had never been just anything. I had been working without a paycheck, without a title, and without recognition. But that was about to change. What I did not know yet was how shocked my husband would be when the court finally attached a number to my so-called non-existent salary. The day of the court hearing arrived faster than I expected, yet it felt like it had been coming for years. I remember standing outside the courthouse holding my folder tightly against my chest. The building looked tall and cold, made of glass and stone, reflecting the morning sun like nothing emotional had ever happened inside it. My husband arrived a few minutes later in a dark suit, looking confident and calm, as if this were just another business meeting. For a moment, I saw the man I had supported for 12 years, the man whose shirts I ironed and whose late-night worries I comforted. But then I remembered the sentence that brought us here. "You're just a housewife." That sentence walked into the courtroom with us. When we sat down, I kept my back straight and my hands folded neatly in my lap. My lawyer whispered that everything would be fine and reminded me to stay calm. Across the room, my husband spoke quietly with his attorney. He looked relaxed. He believed the numbers were on his side. After all, he was the one with the official salary, the promotions, the bank statements showing income deposits every month. On paper, I had no job title and no direct earnings. The hearing began, and his lawyer spoke first. He described my husband as the sole financial provider of the household for over a decade. He emphasized the long hours my husband worked and the income he generated. Then he said something that felt familiar. He said I had not been employed during the marriage. He described me as financially dependent. The words were polite, but the meaning was the same. Just a housewife. When it was our turn, my lawyer stood slowly and confidently. She did not raise her voice. She did not show anger. She simply asked the judge for permission to present documentation of my contributions to the household. The folder I had built over weeks of careful research was placed before the court. I watched as the judge adjusted his glasses and began reading. Page after page outlined the responsibilities I handled daily and weekly for 12 years. Childcare, housekeeping, meal preparation, tutoring, scheduling, budgeting, transportation, event planning, and full household management. Each task had been matched with the average market rate for hiring a professional to perform that service in our area. The courtroom grew quiet as the judge reviewed the breakdown. My husband shifted slightly in his seat. His confidence began to fade, though he tried to hide it. My lawyer explained calmly that if my husband had hired a full-time nanny alone, the monthly cost would have been substantial. Add a housekeeper, a private tutor, a personal chef, and a household manager, and the combined monthly expense would exceed thousands of dollars. She clarified that this calculation did not even include emotional labor or mental load, which are harder to quantify but equally significant. She was not arguing that I held a traditional job. She was proving that my labor had measurable economic value. The judge nodded slowly as he read through the final summary page. Then he looked up and asked a simple question to my husband's attorney. Do you dispute these market rates? There was a pause. The rates were accurate. They were based on public data. There was nothing to dispute. The moment that changed everything came when the judge read the total estimated monthly value of my unpaid labor aloud. Hearing the number spoken in that formal room felt surreal. For years, I had questioned my own worth. Now the court was stating it clearly and officially. The judge acknowledged that while my contributions did not generate direct income deposits, they enabled my husband to focus entirely on his career without interruption. He stated that the stability and growth of my husband's earnings were supported by the structure I maintained at home. It was the first time anyone had described my role with respect in a legal setting. My husband avoided eye contact. The same man who once laughed at my contribution now sat silent as the court recognized it. The judge continued by explaining that in long-term marriages, non-financial contributions are still contributions. He said marriage is not measured only by paychecks but by partnership. That word struck me deeply. Partnership. It was what I believed we had from the beginning. The ruling that followed reflected this understanding. Asset division and support calculations would consider the economic value of my unpaid labor. I felt a wave of validation wash over me, not because I wanted revenge, but because the truth had finally been acknowledged. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I simply breathed. As we walked out of the courtroom, I felt lighter than I had in years. The sentence that once reduced me to something small had been replaced with something powerful. I was not just anything. I was a contributor, recognized not by emotion, but by fact. And the impact of that recognition would continue to unfold in ways my husband never expected. After the judge finished speaking, something shifted in the room that I will never forget. It was not loud. There was no dramatic reaction. But the energy changed. The confidence my husband walked in with was gone. The man who once laughed when he called me just a housewife was now sitting in silence while the court discussed my financial value as if it were a business asset. For years, he believed that because money entered his account, it belonged to him alone. He believed income meant importance. But that day, the court made something very clear. Income grows faster when someone else is carrying the weight behind the scenes. When we stepped outside the courtroom for a short break, he finally looked at me. There was no anger in his eyes this time. There was confusion. Maybe even disbelief. He asked quietly, "You calculated all of that?" I answered calmly, "No. The market did." That was the moment he understood this was not emotion. This was math. When the final settlement discussions began, the tone was completely different from what he expected. Before the documentation was presented, he assumed I would walk away with very little. He assumed that without a job title or salary history, I had limited leverage. But now the negotiation table looked different. My lawyer presented the long-term financial impact of 12 years of unpaid labor. She explained how my management of the home allowed him to accept promotions that required long hours and travel. She explained how stable childcare and home organization directly supported his career growth. She explained that if those services had been outsourced, his disposable income would have been significantly reduced. The numbers were not guesses. They were structured, researched, and documented. I watched his attorney review the papers carefully. For the first time since the divorce process started, my husband looked unsure. The final agreement reflected what the judge had recognized. Assets were divided fairly, not based only on whose name was on the paycheck, but on who helped build the life those paychecks supported. Spousal support was calculated with respect to the economic value of my unpaid work. When the final figures were read aloud, I did not feel victory. I felt balance. This was never about punishing him. It was about correcting the narrative. For 12 years, my role had been invisible. Now it was written in legal language. Permanent. Recognized. Structured. Real. As we signed the documents, my hands were steady. I remembered the night I lay awake staring at the ceiling after he dismissed me. I remembered asking myself what my work was worth. Now I had the answer in ink on official paper. What surprised me most was not the financial outcome. It was the silence from him afterward. On the drive home, he did not speak much. Finally, he said something I did not expect. He said, "I didn't realize it added up like that." I looked out the window and replied softly, "That's because you never counted it." That sentence was not cruel. It was honest. For years, I had not counted it either. I had minimized my own contribution because it did not come with a paycheck. I had allowed the word just to sit in front of my role. Just a housewife. Just at home. Just helping. But there is no such thing as just when you are building a family. There is no just when you are carrying responsibilities every single day without pause. That evening, I walked back into the same house I had managed for over a decade, but it felt different. Not because of the money. Because of the clarity. I understood my value now. Not because the court said so, but because I had taken the time to calculate it. I had taken the time to see it. The biggest transformation was not in the settlement. It was inside me. I no longer introduced myself quietly. I no longer felt small at social gatherings. I no longer believed that unpaid meant unimportant. The court did not create my value. It revealed it. And that revelation changed everything. The woman who once doubted herself now understood something powerful. When you allow others to define your worth, they will often define it smaller than it truly is. But when you take the time to measure your contribution honestly, you may discover that you have been holding up far more than you ever realized. And the real surprise was not the number the judge read that day. The real surprise was how long I had underestimated myself. After everything was finalized, after the signatures were done and the courtroom doors closed behind us, I went home and sat alone in the quiet living room. The same living room where I had once been told I was just a housewife. The furniture had not changed. The walls were the same color. The kitchen still smelled like the meals I had cooked for years. But I was different. I was no longer the woman who questioned her worth in silence. I was no longer the woman who believed that value only came with a paycheck. What hurt the most was not the divorce. It was realizing how easily I had accepted being minimized. I had allowed someone else's definition of success to define me. I had allowed the word just to sit in front of my role for too long. And the truth is, many people live that way without realizing it. They work hard behind the scenes. They support. They sacrifice. They build stability for others. But because the world celebrates visible income more than invisible effort, they begin to shrink themselves. What I learned from this experience is simple but powerful. Unpaid does not mean unimportant. Invisible does not mean insignificant. Contribution is not measured only by direct deposits into a bank account. Contribution is measured by impact. For 12 years, my work allowed someone else to grow without worrying about the details of daily life. That is not just anything. That is structure. That is support. That is leadership in a different form. The court recognized it with numbers, but I had to recognize it within myself first. And that was the real victory. The money helped me rebuild. It gave me stability. But the confidence I gained was worth more than any settlement. I often think about the night he laughed and dismissed my role. If I could go back to that moment, I would not argue. I would not try to prove myself emotionally. I would simply say, one day, this will be calculated. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in certainty. Because facts are stronger than feelings in situations like that. When you bring structure to something invisible, people are forced to see it differently. And that is what changed everything for me. I stopped defending my value with words. I started proving it with evidence. That shift alone changed the direction of my life. Today, I share this story not to shame anyone, but to remind someone listening that your effort matters. Whether you work inside a home, outside a home, or balance both, your contribution deserves respect. Do not wait for a courtroom to tell you what you are worth. Do not wait for someone to reduce you before you calculate your impact. If you are building, nurturing, organizing, supporting, planning, and holding things together, you are working. And you should never allow the word just to stand in front of your role again. If this story spoke to you in any way, I want you to do something simple. Subscribe to this channel so you do not miss the next real-life story. There are so many stories like this that need to be told, and your support helps bring them to light. Also, go down to the comments and tell me which country you are watching from. Tell me the state or the city too. I truly read them, and it amazes me every time I see how far these stories travel across the world. It reminds me that respect, value, and partnership are conversations happening everywhere, not just in one home or one courtroom. And if you have ever been called just anything, I want you to remember this: the world may not always see the work you do, but that does not erase its worth. Sometimes it takes courage to measure what others ignore. Sometimes it takes strength to stand quietly while the truth speaks for you. My husband once said I was just a housewife. The court called me a financial contributor. But today, I call myself something even more important. I call myself aware. And that awareness changed my life forever.